Thank you. Right, we move straight to item 10, and I think we have Alison here. Warren is coming forward. And Peter. If you'll just want to introduce yourselves and your roles, and then we can go into the presentation. I just want to switch in.
I'm Warren McLennan, Manager, Regional Northwestern Islands Planning, and I have Peter Vari here, who is the team leader for the Northern and Hauraki Gulf Islands area, and we've got Alison Pye as well, who's one of our senior policy planners who works in Peter's team and who's largely written most of the report. So I thought I would start by talking through some of the resolutions, because I realise some of you may not have had time to look at all of them. You'll recall that there were two parts to the resolutions that the former planning committee made back in May last year. So one was this compliance. You'll see there, note that the Compliance and Monitoring Department has commenced a project to analyse the resource consent conditions, and that part you've just heard, and they worked with civil aviation to get all the patterns and so on. The last part, F, is what we're here to talk about, which is once that investigation's complete, we prepare a report with an analysis of the results and an assessment of the options available to address helicopter activity in the Auckland region. So that's what this report is about. So what I'll do is just go through some of the options that we looked at, and then I'll look at and just reflect on the resolutions that each of the three local boards have provided. So if we go to the next one, please. Or do I? Right, okay. So the first option is really the one where we simply defer any further work on the helicopters until we get to our Auckland Unitary Plan review. So that would simply defer it, and we'd start that work for 2026. The second one is the early implementation of National Planning Standard 15, and this amendment would propose text changes to exclude the use of averaging. So it would remove the 3-day rolling average, which is currently in the Hauraki Gulf District Plan, and make that 1 day. And that measurement of noise is similar to what happens already in the Auckland Unitary Plan. So that option can be implemented without any consultation. It's simply a national policy or national planning standard, and it's not open to challenge. We wouldn't go through the submissions or appeals, and in fact we must not go through the normal Schedule 1 process. The advantage of that one also is that it would have the effect of increasing the setback distance to the nominal boundary, which is the distance that we use. That would increase that by around 50 metres. So where you often get around, so we at the moment, the 3-day one averages to about the 50 metre limit, then this would move that out to 100 metres. The third option there is the plan modification to the Hauraki Gulf Islands Plan, bringing in and introducing to the helicopter rules the ability to delete the it would involve a plan change process. It would delete the restricted discretionary activity status, and it would replace it with a non-complying one in residential zones and discretionary in non-residential areas. In total, that would align more with the unitary plan, which has got a non-complying activity status in residential zones. So that's a sort of a full review of that, which would mean that resource consents could be considered with all of the effects. Option 4 is the last one, and that's really around introducing a prohibited activity status for helicopter activity in residential zones, both in the Hauraki Gulf Islands and the unitary plan, to change the activity status of restricted discretionary activities to become discretionary activities. Now that would involve 2 separate plan changes because they're at the moment 2 separate plans, and so that would be prohibition is a very difficult, very high bar to be able to justify without changing the entire policy framework in each plan. And for example, in the Hauraki Gulf Islands plan, it was written at a time when economic development was very important to many of the residents, and so there is a presumption around the promotion of tourism within a number of objectives and policies in that plan. And to go from there to prohibition, you'd have to do quite a lot of work there. Clearly it would be, I mean, you're trying to justify a blanket prohibition, so it's very difficult to be able to do that. So those are the 4 ones that we've evaluated. Next one, please. So what I thought I'd do next is to just talk about number 2. Oh, sorry, that's me, is it? Me to click it? No. Oh, just the ordinary. So the recommended option is number 2, which will amend the in NPS 15 to include that within the Hauraki Gulf Islands plan. It tightens the noise rules and will make it harder for applications in the Hauraki Gulf plan to meet the noise standards necessary to still qualify as a restricted discretionary activity. So it's more likely that there will be more applications which fit into the discretionary one, and that is unrestricted in the way that you can assess the effects there. So I think I've gone through the rest of that. It aligns, or much more closely aligns, the Hauraki Gulf Islands plan with the unitary plan. And as I've said, technically it's a change which allows fast implementation, cannot be challenged. It involves a short report, and it involves a public notice. So it would be able to improve the Hauraki Gulf Islands plan pretty quickly. Next one, please. Oh, me, that's right. So I just thought I'd look at the 3 local boards and the resolutions that they've passed over the last few days, and last week as well. So the Waitemata local board supported option 2, for the reason that it would manage noise effects in line with the national standards. They did have some concerns about how to give feedback, and I think that's going to be discussed as well. And they wanted to make sure that resource consents in residential areas are publicly notified, and that happens now with the unitary plan. They made some recommendations about shorter consent time periods, and that really has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. They gave support to the Waiheke and Aotearoa local boards, and that they made the comment that the proliferation of helipads is a concern there. They also wanted to cap the number of helicopter movements, and they wanted a proactive compliance plan for consents, noting that consent holders do contribute towards, or can be asked to contribute at the expense of that monitoring. And they wanted a further review of rules to take place at the next AUP, which is also part of our recommendation. They wanted a location for a commercial helipad servicing the western part of the city, and I guess that's not part of what the council would do, but that's something that they wanted to see. And then they really noted an overall harmful effect that they saw on particularly on residents' quality of life, and recommended also that transponders be turned on for takeoff and landing as well. Next one. Waiheke, well, you heard pretty much from the local board this morning, but I'll just go through their recommendations quickly. So they made the point that this is less of a compliance issue and more of a plan matter. So that's why we're looking at these options. We also had Quiet Sky, Waiheke, this morning talking to their report, and the chair of the local board also mentioned that, and you have that attachment with you. So they wanted to approve option 2 being introduced with urgency, but option 3 being implemented as well. So it's really both of those options, and option 2 should not be delayed by the implementation of option 3. Well, option 2 is fairly quick. They also were frustrated about the processes around delaying the implementation of the national planning standard, and I guess I would say to that until very recently, when we were looking at those planning standards, we were looking at the bundle of them together, which covers a whole range of items around topics such as new zones to go in the plan, a series of new definitions, a whole range of things which really would be most served if it was all done at one review time. And it wasn't until just recently we realised that the noise one we could actually separate out and simply work on that one, and so that's why option 2 recommends that early adoption of that. They were also concerned about the protection of the vulnerable wildlife, excuse me, and that's been discussed earlier this morning, and they also raised some concerns with the report that's been done, and I think that's been talked through with the compliance guys beforehand. And you have that full report. So the next, I think they continue on there. They also want us to work there with CAA to find out more information around the unrecorded helipads, and they were concerned about the analysis on complaints and thought that we should also add in the petition which was presented to the council back in December of 21, I think it was. And they've also talked about the, as I talked about before, the opportunity to implement NPS 15 earlier. So that was that one. The last one was Aotea, whose comments were, or resolutions we got last night. They had particular mana whenua concerns, and they felt that some of the applications had seemed to have little consideration for their intrinsic values. They were really noting that the island was a quiet sanctuary, and most of their comments around high conservation values, which would negatively impact local biodiversity and so on. They supported the immediate implementation of option 2, but then they also went on to identify that that's an interim step, and their support was for option 4, which is introducing the prohibited activity for helicopter activity in residential zones in both the Hauraki Gulf Islands plan and in the unitary plan. And they also saw that there was a need to give greater consideration to they meant the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. They think that there are now the capacity now for airfields and helicopter pads are pretty full, and request that we work with regulators to develop clear flight corridors across and around Aotea Great Barrier, and that's something that is really the responsibility of the civil aviation. So those are the options, and those are the so you've got the options, and you've seen the responses from the 3 local boards. I also wanted to just touch on the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, because there's clearly some debate between us and the the Quiet Skies Waiheke people. We think that the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement does cover the coastal environment of the Hauraki Gulf and Islands plan, and it's done in a special way here for this. Sections 7 and 8 of the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park Act recognises the national significance of the Hauraki Gulf, and also the management of the Gulf itself. And for the section 7 and 8, and section 10 says that for the coastal environment, sections 7 and 8 must be treated as a New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement issued under the Resource Management Act. So we think that's a reasonably clear interpretation, and I thought we needed to make that clarification after the discussion that was had this morning. So that's the presentation. Peter, did you want to add anything?
I think that's a huge amount of information, and we thank you. And I hope everyone's read all the attachments and all the options in the full report. So we might just go to questions, if that's okay, and then see what we might pull out of there if there are, because we have 4 already. Councillor Sayers?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Warren. If it moves to this discretionary or even discretionary, so the options, was it 2 and 3? Can you just explain how that affects the full notification? I think you mentioned it does go out for notification now, but there seems to be some of the feedback from the local board is for full notification. So how do those, can you just clarify how that full notification process operates now, and if that increases the likelihood of it?
So yes, so currently under the Hauraki Gulf Islands plan, basically the helicopter activity, a helipad is a restricted discretionary activity. So, and with that status comes the ability for it to be non-notified. If it was changed to full discretionary via option 3, not option 2, but option 3, then the standard provisions about notification under the RMA would apply. It also means that with restricted discretionary activity status, the range of things that you can consider when you consider a resource consent, at the moment they're limited to noise effects and the visual effects of earthworks and so on of a helipad. So when it was discretionary, you could consider a whole range of things that were available. So you could consider explicitly a whole everything basically. So that's the difference. And I know we have someone from our consents team here. If Brad Allen is here, did you want to add anything to that, Brad? Yeah.
You just want to introduce yourself, Brad?
So.
Kia ora, I'm Brad Allen. I'm the Resource Consents Team Leader for the Hauraki Gulf Islands area. So Peter has basically outlined the two aspects. With the restricted discretionary activity status, there's a non-notification rule, which means that we can only notify if there's a special circumstance applicable to that consent itself. And it also narrows the matters of discretion that we can look at with the resource consent assessment. So switching it to discretionary would drop away with that non-notification preclusion, so it would be open for notification, provided that it meets the test of the RMA for notification in terms of the effect level, and then you'd also have unfettered matters of discretion to look at.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. So just a lead-on question, if I may, Chair, just a quick one. So does that automatically mean full notification or just notification, so i.e. limited, or does it full? And also, Peter, just pick up on your point where other things can be included in there. We had a presentation about the island, and the bird life on the island. Or those things could be included. Yep. Just clarification on those. Yeah.
Thank you. Through the chair. Yes. So all matters will be able to be considered, because your discretion is only limited when you're restricted discretion, which is what most of them can make their application fit into. So you wouldn't have any limits on that discretion. You can consider any effect. Sorry, can you remind me? Yeah, so in terms of notification, as I mentioned before, at the moment there is a specific rule that says non-notified if you're in the ID space. Going into discretionary, that rule falls away and doesn't apply, and then you're then subject to your normal RMA tests in terms of it has to be at least a minor effect on persons to notify persons, so limited notification, and it has to be a minor or more than minor effect on the environment before you can publicly notify. So it brings in the ability for it. It's still case by case in terms of what the effects are.
Thank you. Good questions, Greg. But just to confirm, Brad, that all would require the plan change to allow those things to happen. We can't change the... Yeah. Councillor Walker. Questions answered. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your quite detailed paper. Look, I've got 3 questions, potentially 4, depending on your answers. So I note that you went for option 2 as staff recommendation. Can you confirm that adopting option 2, that will have no impact on the ability for emergency service helicopters or police helicopters to operate when they need to?
Yes, so for example, in both the Auckland Unitary Plan and in the Hauraki Gulf Islands Plan, as a permitted activity, emergency services and so on are listed as a permitted activity, so they can continue. Changing that noise, that removing the averaging provision won't affect them at all.
Thank you. I just want a clarification point on paragraph 19. So that says there'll be no impact on helicopter activity for existing helipad consent holders. If we adopt option 2 around noise standards, does that only apply to new consent applications?
Yes, unless there's some sort of review clause in the granted consents, but yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, looking at all options, emphasis is placed on the mitigation around the negative social impacts of helicopter noise, although the compliance report doesn't suggest there is a particular problem at this time. So my question is, has there been any assessment of the positive economic benefits of helicopter activity?
Not at this stage, but again, if we look at the objectives and policies that were behind the rules in the Hauraki Gulf Islands plan in particular, they absolutely recognise that there is a benefit. For example, the rules around helipads and so on acknowledge the Gulf Islands are a popular tourist destination and that air travel to, from and around the Gulf Islands is a recognised component of the tourist industry. And so that objective has driven the status, the restricted discretionary activity status, through, because they've seen the benefits of helicopter activity to the tourism sector.
So supplementary, if I may, Mr. Chair, please. So therefore, if you went for option A, would this work be done for the review of the unitary plan so that we could consider all the positive and the negative impacts of helicopter activity and not just half the story? Option A was leaving it to the unitary plan.
You're in option 1.
Sorry, option 1, sorry, on A.
Third one. So sorry, what was the question again?
So what we've got, everyone's been talking about the negative social impacts of noise, but actually no one's looked at the positive economic benefits necessarily. So if we went for option 1, would both the positives and the negatives be reviewed as part of the unitary plan review?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. At any plan making stage, we would, apart from option 2, which is just the standard one, but for 1, 3 and 4, we would have to carry out significant consultation with all sectors of the community, and it would all be publicly notified, the normal process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And just before I go to you, Councillor Darby, now that I'll just move what is up there, and I think Councillor Darby's emailed to say he'd like to support or second what is there, and we'll just continue with questions. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. And Warren, thank you. Thanks for the phone explanations you've given Warren, Peter and Alison. Just in terms of the prohibited status, Warren, you mentioned it's a high bar to win, because you've got to think about the process and the evidence to get to the end of your plan change to lock it in. And there may be counter evidence. You said it's a high bar. How have you arrived at it being a high bar? Is there case law? I think you did mention it to me prior, and maybe even in this report, which I haven't found. But is that informed by your planning response and a legal response?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes, it is both.
Okay, just going to the plan change, we mentioned there that we have to commence the AUP plan change in 26. That's the commencement date, isn't it? That's not the date we're notifying it. So, and that could be could be as many as 3 years on before we have a landing point, because, it's subject to appeal, so it could be operative in part. Would it be reasonable to say we could be looking at 2029 before a plan change might be through?
Yeah, I think your timing is right. It could be that, but the point I guess we're making with this our recommendation here to do option 2 is that it's an interim step, and we always know that we are going to have to review the whole range of helicopter provisions when we do the unitary plan anyway. So if we go for option 2, we're changing things so that the averaging of the noise levels in the Hauraki Gulf Islands plan is taken out, and we know that 3 years or whatever the number of years down the track, we'll be doing the full review of all the provisions. So by doing option 2 now, we're not foregoing doing option 3 when we do the amendment of the Auckland Unitary Plan and bringing the Hauraki Gulf Islands fully within the scope of that plan.
So, Chair, just pursuing that, so it's more like it's a pragmatic approach, you're saying, to do it through the full review. It's not one that's driven by a cost?
For example, if we went into one thing that could happen is if we went into a full a plan change for option 3 now, given the length of time, 2 to 3 years before it could actually, with appeals, because we know the provisions that are in the Hauraki Gulf Islands plan at the moment came through an appeal process. It's likely that anything we do with new helicopter provisions could also go through that process. That could take a number of years. And so what we would end up with is, if we did a plan change now, that might take 3 years. The cost of appeals and planning process, not just for us, but for the wider community who wanted to be involved in that. And then at the same time, near the end of that process, we'd be embarking again on the full unitary plan review.
Okay.
So we could even overlap. And that's a big burden for us as the ratepayers and a big burden for the community as well.
Okay, look, come to the, I think it's the final question, Chair, if I may, and it is the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, and referring to that, Warren, you spoke a few words around that. About 3 years ago, I took an interest in an application, a helipad application at Paradise Drive, and I looked at the report and I read it in quite a lot of detail, and it shocked me actually that there was no reference to an SEA, a special ecological area, isn't it, that abuts Paradise Drive on the coastal side. It wasn't to be seen, and it was like even our own planning staff, and no criticism of them now, it's historic, they gave no notion of thought to the proximity of an SEA, which had to be travelled over at low altitude to land on the helipad as proposed, because we know helicopters just don't come down from 1,000 feet. So going to that National Coastal Policy Statement, can you just take us through that again, because it is quite technical. I think what we're looking for, the communities are looking for, is that the National Coastal Policy Statement is being given effect to absolutely, and that all of those ecological impacts can be considered. You might have to just go over that again, please, Warren.
Yeah. So I don't know the details of the consent application, and perhaps Brad would be able to talk to that. I guess the key thing is that we consider that the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park Act has several sections in it which relate, sections 7 and 8, which relate to protection of all of these various environments. And then section 10 ties it together to say that these sections form part of the New Zealand should be considered as a New Zealand coastal policy statement. Now that's in the HGI plan. You would have been looking at a resource consent under the Auckland Unitary Plan or before that?
It was under the AUP, yeah.
So that's separate, and as far as I'm aware, that means that the normal NZCPS would have been considered. Is that not right, Brad?
Yeah, through the chair. I think I'm aware of the one. The Paratai Drive consent was for a noise testing ahead of a potential application that was going to come in. So it wasn't to establish, So it wasn't to establish the pad itself. It was to look at getting some noise measurements to then see if they were going to pursue an actual application. I haven't actually looked at that decision, so I haven't actually looked at the coverage of the coastal policy statement or the SCA, but I can have a look if that's relevant. Yeah.
Sure, I don't want to go into that application. All I'm wanting some assurance on, and our communities are wanting some assurance that those ecological effects are really comprehensively canvassed. And you're saying that in applications that are coming in now, they are.
Thank you, through the chair. For the AUP ones like that one, it should have been something that was canvassed. It may have been at the lower end of the scale, given that it was for testing and not for the permanent establishment, but it is an aspect that should have been within the scope at least of it. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Yes, in regard to option 2, compliance with the National Planning Standard of 2019. Is that really an option? You know, we've talked about, was it a reasonably high compliance with the helicopter activity? But what about our compliance? Are you giving that? You're giving compliance with a national planning standard as some sort of an option for people to support. That's something that should be done as a matter of duty.
So we recognise when the national planning standards, when they've come out, they have a time frame for implementation, and what we're talking about is rather than implementing, because they require significant changes to the plan. So, for example, the zone, all the names of the zones and the range of zones, the definitions in a plan and so on would have to be changed under the national planning standards. That's what the government wants to happen across New Zealand. What we're saying is, and we were given a time frame to do it, what we're saying is we think we can pick out this one part, which is addressing the concern about noise, and we can do that early, rather than doing the comprehensive change which we're required to do. You're right, it's a requirement, but we're doing this early, and we think that is still an option to do it early, rather than waiting, because we still have time under the government's time frame that we're required to do this. We still have time. So the option is do it early rather than waiting and doing it as part of the comprehensive change which we would be required to do further on down the track.
Can I just confirm this national planning standard came out in 2019, did it not? And you think doing it now is kind of doing it early? Really? Is that best practice?
The government is, for example, for the unitary plan has given us 10 years, so we would be doing it in 2029. So they have long time frames in the implementation. So we're saying an option in the interim is to do it earlier than we would have normally had to do it, which addresses the noise concern raised in the Hauraki Gulf Islands plan, and then we do everything else in a comprehensive way when we do the unitary plan review and bring the islands within it, within the unitary plan fully.
Through the chair, if I could just add, we do think it actually is an option to bring it early. The package we're talking about with the national planning standards is huge and wide-ranging, and what we're doing is picking this one out alone. knowing that we're going to have to do something by 2029. It's entirely normal for us to have to prioritise some of this stuff, and that is partly why when government makes legislative changes, and I know that you know all of this, but when they make changes, it usually takes a long time. It often takes a public notification process to go through. Therefore, it's not something we can just switch on and switch off immediately. So this particular part doesn't require public notification. It just gets slotted in. It's a national planning standard. It's just what happens. It's therefore quick. We've pulled it out. There's a whole lot more work that we will have to do leading up to 2029. Plus, we have a review of the unitary plan. Plus, of course, we've got all of the current government reform legislation and requirements that they're asking us to do over the next few years. So as much as we would love to be able to have all of the resources to be able to do everything immediately, it just doesn't happen that way. So that is why it is a matter of prioritisation and why we are suggesting it's an option in this case.
Can I just ask you, Ms Tyler, how many plan changes has this council dealt with and is dealing with since the establishment of the Auckland unitary plan? What number are we up to now? We can talk about 78, but it's higher than that, isn't it?
Yes, it probably will be. I know we certainly, so if we just, because we're including private plan changes in that as well, aren't we, Warren? So maybe you've got some numbers.
There would be quite a few private plan changes, but I'm imagining
What
the
number is
would
it
be
now?
approaching 90.
About
Sorry?
91, I think, 90.
Is it 90?
91, and that's, when did that plan come? 2013. That's quite a bunch of plan changes every year that we must be budgeted for. Is that correct?
So many of these are private plan changes. I mean,
Or?
for which we recover
adopt.
costs. And you can have large plan changes and small plan changes. I remember one of the earliest plan changes I did within this new council was a plan change to protect one tree. Right? That was not exactly a large plan change. We're talking about a plan change to manage helicopter effects being a significant plan change going right through the whole gamut.
And I'll keep it quick. Can I just ask you one more thing? Was I mistaken when I heard you say, Mr. McLennan, that the helipad applications under the AUP are notified? Did I hear that?
They are.
Because they have a different status, as there's no automatic non-notification clause as they are in the Hauraki Gulf Islands. So they go through the normal test under the RMA to determine whether or not they should be notified or limited notified.
There's two types of notification. There's limited notification whereby the applicant talks to the neighbours, next door neighbours, and then there's ones that are publicly notified. So how many helipad applications under the AUP have been publicly notified? Because the impression has been given is that's the norm, and we know that it's not.
Thank you, through the chair. In terms of AUP consents, most of the ones down in Westmere and they're probably the main central ones, they're all actually legacy consents pre-AUP. There have been a couple recently, ones for a variation, which was limited notified. While it was determined for limited notification, the applicant withdrew that and elected to publicly notify. 130 submissions, and then they withdrew their application. There was another one that was put through, which was the Sarsfield, I believe it was, which was on a non-notified basis, but that was challenged under judicial review and overturned. So there haven't been any granted under the new AUP rules in terms of that Westmere area.
So public notification rather than limited notification is not the norm under the AUP non-complying. Is that correct?
It's dependent on the application itself and the effects of
Just that I've got the the impression was given inadvertently that under the AUP, helipad applications are publicly notified, and they are not, unfortunately, and they should be.
Right, thank you. And keep in mind on when we're talking budget to do things, we've reduced the budgets over the last number of years while increasing the amount of work, and the government has a lot to answer for, especially Plan Change 78 and huge amount of reform. So the last 3 years, on top of the pandemic, the planning team have been doing far more with fewer resources. So we just need to keep that in mind. Deputy Chair Angela Dalton, Councillor Dalton.
Thank you. Just want to clarify something for my own mind. Brad, I think it's a question for you. I think it was Quiet Sky that said that under the RMA, the NZCPS has not been applied in the Hauraki Gulf Island area in terms of coastal wildlife when doing consenting. Is that correct?
Thanks, through the chair. The current settings of the plan are that it is restricted discretionary, so it puts restrictions on, and that restricts us on high policy documents as well. So we've got the umbrellas of noise, we've got the umbrellas of if there's a physical earthworks or a structure associated with establishing the helipad, and it comes within those umbrellas, then yes. Outside of that, at the moment, for a restricted discretionary one, we will be restricted on it.
Gosh, so the environment is not considered, the coastal bird life, wildlife, nothing? Okay, thank you. Megan, my second question, last question, to give confidence to Waiheke, particularly the local board, under option C, notwithstanding D, saying we've got no money, is it possible to begin pre-work is it possible to begin some work as part of the pre-work of the AUP? Thank you.
Through the chair, yes, of course it's possible. The question will come, of course, as to priorities of work program. We don't have the resources at the moment to just start some work or take it kind of slow for a few years. We would need to get instructions from you to say, look, this is a priority to do this, and therefore we'd have to advise what other things are going to drop off or get deferred or somehow get slowed down. In reality, I think if we do this work, you just want to get it done as opposed to eke it out and do it in little bits. And it really just comes to prioritisation.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you, Councillor. And I have asked, there is no, in the next financial year from July 1, there is no budget at all to reprioritise for this work. So there isn't actually a choice, even if we said today, hey, reprioritise, there isn't. And the only option we would have is to get this prioritised through governing body through the 10-year budget. So that, I've got that in the background, but that would be a discussion for all of us to have, that we can't make that decision here when we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. But it is budgeted as a part of the omnibus changes to the unitary plan, but that's obviously later. Member Ashby.
Kia ora. Thank you for the report. Just a couple of questions from me. One, this first one has two components, but really it's how has a te ao Māori lens, I guess, been applied to your analysis in terms of the options? So not talking about weekly lists and things like that, but I guess the views of mana whenua, notably, and I'll break this into two questions, Ngā te rehua, and a part of this is related to, we've talked about the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. Policy 2 of that, Clause E, talks about taking into account iwi management plans when you're making changes and thinking about activities in the coastal environment. And I just note Ngā te rehua's iwi management plan has a page on inappropriate use of airspace. So have you taken that into is that reflected in your analysis? I haven't seen it in the report, but is that, were you aware of that? And did you take that into your thinking? Then the second part of that question is, in regard to Waiheke, have you sought the views of, or have you collated previous views of Ngāti Pāwa, for example, in relation to this sort of thing?
Thanks for the question. Yes, certainly Ngāti Rehua were pretty strong in the previous report. So that was that May 22 report. They were pretty strong in their opposition to resource consents being granted along the Midlands Beach area, not far from an Urupa and so on. And as we did that report, I remember looking right back to the cultural, what was the one that Nicola did?
The environmental plan.
Yeah, the Ngāti Rehua environmental plan that we looked at, that certainly set out a whole range of places where they were particularly keen to preserve peace and quiet and amenity and so on. So, and that's come through even in the resolution from the local board today. In terms of Ngaitaiki Tamaki and Ngāti Poa Iwi Trust, we haven't discussed this report with them specifically because we know that once we do a plan change, there will be a whole lot of consultation. But through the area plan work that we did, we certainly got some strong views from each of them around the importance of quiet and amenity to some of these significant places.
Thank you. And through the chair, just one final question. I guess option 2 is a very narrow scope, and I understand that makes it, I guess, a easier win than the other options. But it would be fair to say there's no scope. You talked earlier about there's little scope for, in terms of helicopters, for under the matters of discretion for mana whenua values. It's quite limited. I'm correct? Yeah. And so under that option, there's no further scope to increase those mana whenua values as matters of discretion because it's very technical. So I guess the question I have is, given the first part of my question around coastal policy statement and the views of iwi, which are clearly going in one direction, which we've heard about today, and the limited scope of, no scope under option 2 to improve that, would it be fair to say that option 3 or 4 would be the better options in terms of compliance with the desires of the relevant mana whenua? I'm assuming the answer is yes, but take your advice.
Yes, I think you're correct that option 3 gives much more ability to consider a much wider range of things. And therefore, for option 3, it's really a timing thing as to when we do that larger plan change. But there is an advantage in option 2, the narrowly focused one, in that in order for it to remain, for an application to remain restricted discretionary, it's either going to have fewer flights or because there is a wider boundary to get to. So it could tip a number of consent applications into the discretionary basket anyway. Yeah.
Thank you, Member Ashby. Last questions, Councillor Ferry. Oh, sorry, and Councillor Filipaina.
Kia ora. So I've just been trying to get my head around a couple of aspects of it. And I guess first up, I'm gonna ask along the lines of Councillor Dalton's questions and the answers from Megan and Richard about the prioritisation issue. So is it an option to say at this point, if there is something that needs to be delayed, this would go up the list in terms of, being a project that we would look at to slot in if something was delayed? Can we do that?
Through the chair, just in thinking about it, there's an opportunity coming up, of course, through the long-term plan, not organisation sense for the council, obviously, across everything that it does. That could be a way of doing that prioritisation and saying, yep, put this one to the top, and then we can advise you, well, and these things are going to drop off the bottom, or it would be deferred at the bottom. So it is absolutely an option. What I can't do for you right now is start the work tomorrow.
Yeah, sure.
That could be the process by which you could have this conversation if this is what you as a group want to do.
Okay. That presupposes, though, that we're shutting the door on any work on this in the next financial year, because we won't sign off the LTP until the end of the next financial year. Yeah.
That's right. So yes, so the long-term plan would be, 30 June 2024 would be signed up, for that next 24-25 year. If you're wanting something, within the next 12 months, then we would have to advise you as to whether we can drop anything off. The work that we're doing at the moment in this particular area is focused very much on the government reforms, as you're aware. And so I don't think there's really any ability for us to change that unless, again, there was a whole bunch of money or resources that came in, which is not something that you probably have an opportunity to think about, certainly not this side of the budget conversation.
Totally understand that, and I was more meaning to say if for some reason there was a delay with a piece of work, which meant that there was some capacity that came up in the next financial year.
It could. Okay. I'm not aware of what that could be, but it could happen, yeah.
Okay. Because that does happen from time to time, not very often, unfortunately. The other question I have, which is probably more for the table over there, is in regard to the Hauraki Gulf Islands plan. So in the report on page para 75, it says that there was a review done in 2016, but I could find one that was done in 2006, but I couldn't find one from 2016. So is that a typo? It just seems to me that that's quite an important thing for us to understand, that it's actually been 17 years and not 7 years. And I'm just thinking about how much has changed in that time period, particularly in relation to Waiheke becoming a place that has almost two communities living on it, the people who come and go a lot and the people who live there all the time, and there's quite a big difference between those two communities. We've also changed our views a lot around environmental protection over that time as well. So I just wanted to check about that, because I think that does have a bearing.
Yeah, that is a typo. That one, it is 2012, 13, which was the review of the HGI plan.
Okay, so sorry, what year was the review?
Started in I don't know, Megan, when was it?
The current one, 2006, I think it became operative, didn't it? So it's in the early 2000s.
Yeah, okay. So
mid-2000s,
I guess just when we're thinking about the prioritisation and timing of this, that's a salient fact for me, is it's not like we just did this. So, yeah. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
And can I just clarify, so the current provisions were, as I said before, part of a consent order, Environment Court consent order in 2012, and then the plan was made partially operative in 2013.
Where did 2016 come from?
I think the thing was it might have started in 2006. It was a long time in gestation to get to the final version in 2013.
Okay, that's still over a decade. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And yeah, I have asked around the funding, and we have over the term since the 2021 10-year budget kind of overexerted the staff of what they can reprioritise now. And with, as my understanding is, within the next year, there is no ability to reprioritise anything unless we take it to finance. So my thought was maybe through the 10-year budget. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I just want to cover off the current rules that apply to the mainland, and excuse me for using that, and not our two respective islands. Currently around those, is there the ability, well, hold on, under the process available, the applicant has to take into account wahi tapu here currently? And what is the situation in regards to Waiheke and Aotea?
Thank you, through the chair. At the moment, the unitary plan, so mainland, consents are unrestricted in terms of what they look at. So if there's a relevant effect, they need to address that. So yes, it should be taken into account. In terms of the Hauraki Gulf Islands, there's, as Warren said, there's two activities that you can be. You can be restricted discretionary if you meet a noise clause and you're the only one, as the only helipad on the site. You'll be an RD consent, and that restricts our discretion to just the noise and physical, visual effects of physical change. If you don't meet those, then you're a discretionary activity, and it should be considered in terms of all matters that are relevant.
Right, and under option 3, that could have made it possible to take into account on the two, on Waiheke and Great Barrier Aotea, we could have had the ability to take into account Wahi Tapu and Mana Whenua views.
Thank you, through the chair. That's correct. If we are changing, so option 3 is changing the activity statuses, and that takes it away from that discretion. So it would open it up. So the discretionary and the non-complying would both have the scope to go there if that policy shift was made.
Okay, Chair, so also I don't know whether it should be to our staff or to you, Chair, because of your recommendations, but I don't know whether there's an ability to include the work. I was looking at the report dated the 3rd of May last year, when Great Barrier and Aotea had their recommendations brought to the Planning Committee. And there was work in the recommendations that went through about working with mana whenua. So, Chair, based on what I've just heard from our staff, what, and it may be to Megan, but what issues would there be if there was work around mana whenua and getting their views that we currently have to on the mainland, with those work to be done, Megan?
Through the chair, that would obviously still need a plan change to actually, happen on the ground. And so that effectively that is absolutely what we would be doing as part of, for example, option 3, if that's where we go. If option 2 was requested of us, but option 3 wasn't, then that's a little bit to Councillor Dalton's question about, could you do a little bit now? You could do a bit of that bit while until you get to that kind of 2026 date. But in reality, we wouldn't do that. You'd either do it or you wouldn't do it. So, I hope that's helpful.
So based on the budgetary constraints, and option 3 obviously is off the table as a result of the budgetary constraints, and we're looking forward from a process perspective, consistency of having the same rules here, as well as being applied to Waiheke and Aotea. My question is in regards to D that you've got up there, Chair, and it is budgeted for within the full review. What is that time frame again? I'm hearing so many dates. Is that within the next 6 years, in the next 5 years? That's really the issue, because if you have a look at it, well, I won't get into comment because I don't. This is just a question.
So essentially would require a bid from the planning team to move this work any further through the 10-year budget, to move this work any earlier than November 2026, because this work will be included from November 2026. So I guess my I've been discussing it with the team, like what is the only way? The only way would be for governing body to put a request in to reprioritise through the 10-year budget, because there is no way we can do it from July 1 this year. But my D was to try and highlight that we do support the direction of our local boards, and we do support the work being done. So it's sort of like locking in that decision to be part of the work, including probably pre-work pre-November 26. Is that correct?
Yes, so we have to begin the review of the unitary plan in 2026. So again, that doesn't mean that this matter will be sorted in 2026 or not even notified. It might be, as I think Peter said earlier, it could be a couple of years post that. As we're doing the full review, it will be part of a bigger review. So it's post 2026 in reality. Yeah.
Chair, I've read the previous planning committee reports, and just one more question just to our staff. Around the NPS 15, and you mentioned, I think earlier, that it could have been done about a year ago. Would that be correct? I mean, I know we'd looked at it, and looking through the minutes, could that have been done a year ago?
Yes, that's correct, and we didn't realise that at the time. We thought all of those standards should be bundled together and put into the comprehensive entire plan review of the Auckland Unitary Plan at the time that the Hauraki Gulf Islands Plan would also be incorporated in that. It's not until recently that we've had advice that we could actually take that one standard out, because it doesn't really have too many connections with other parts of the plan. It's simply about helicopter noise, that we could take that out and do that as one package rather than have to wait to do the entire bundle.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I'll just reserve my right, but it won't be that much of a whakaaro for our team, Chair. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor. And yeah, on that option too, I think the big difference is that we don't have to consult, and we don't need a hearing, and we don't need submissions, and that what takes away the hundreds of thousands of dollars of a full plan change. That's one move forward with much more to go. Right, so we have exhausted the speakers. We'll ask you all to step away, so thank you very much for significant amount of information. We do have and could we put that up on screen? I don't know if you've had a chance to type it out yet. So we have an amendment by it's an amendment by addition from Councillor Lee and Councillor Walker, and I guess could everyone have maybe if we could zoom in a little bit, could that help? Yeah, if that's all right, to make a little bigger on screen for people. If you want to, do you have any comment on, maybe you could just briefly say, give your piece on this item, Councillor Lee, and then we might try and include it, or if everyone wants it to go to a vote, we can let it go that way. But if you just want to explain what the purpose of the...
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll keep it just the technical argument here. Originally, the Aotea Great Barrier Local Board really wanted a moratorium on these applications, and it was explained to them by planning staff that a moratorium is not lawful, cannot be undertaken, cannot be imposed because it's not lawful. A prohibited activity, so desired by the local board, but shown to be not lawful. here we have a preference for prohibited activity, which is lawful under the Resource Management Act, always has been. The Act has been amended so many times since 1991, but prohibited activity remains in the Act for a very good reason, because there are some activities that are so antisocial and have such an impact on people and communities that prohibited activity is considered by Parliament the best way to deal with them. A lot of people now have concluded that this is the best and tidiest way to resolve this problem, because the raft of measures which have been adopted or going to have been recommended, patchwork of measures, will not tidy this away, to be frank. It will not end public concerns. It will not give relief to neighbours whose quiet enjoyment of their properties, ratepayers and citizens, whose quiet enjoyment of their property is going to be disturbed inevitably by private helicopter applications, helipads, recreational private helipads in their neighbourhood, whether they be in residential areas on the Gulf Islands or residential areas in the city. Prohibited activity is something which almost frightens staff, but it certainly, there's officers take an adverse approach to the idea, and that's fair enough. But the fact of the matter is, members, across to Tasman and Sydney, a whole raft of areas, residential areas, neighbourhood areas, business development areas, prohibit helipads in those areas, and that's in the planning documents in New South Wales and the Sydney City Council. So, and I can share that information. So, what we're looking for here is to resolve the problem. The key argument that persuaded, for instance, the Waitemata Local Board to back off from its original position of prohibited activity, which I think it came to in December 2021 and was changed last week without any workshop, on the fly, if you will, was the idea of how much a plan changed to achieve prohibited activity would cost. And obviously, concerned about the financial problems the council is dealing with, the local board decided to back off from that prohibited activity on that argument alone. What we are looking for here is ways and means how we could deal with this problem in our budgeted forecast budget or contingency budget going forward to deal with plan changes. Plan changes is routine business for this council. We're up to, was it 91? And they'll keep on coming, and there'll be our plan changes and there'll be private plan changes that spring up here and there which we adopt, and that's a key part of our routine business, dealing with plan changes. So this is not some sort of aberration, oh dear, a plan change, how are we going to pay for that? We need to avoid that situation and, if you like, sequence a plan change into our budget profile going forward. And all we're asking for at this stage is what are the ways and means this council could do that, and therefore consider option 4 at a future date. So that's what we're asking for here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Sorry, point of order, Chair. Just seeking your clarification. Are we allowed to ask questions on an amendment?
I will allow it because it's complex, I think you are. So you can ask.
I just need some clarification.
Maybe Megan only, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I won't cut in the queue though. I'll just put my hand up and put me at the back. Yeah. Oh, you want me to go?
Yes,
okay,
yep.
Cool. Look, can I just get some clarification? Sorry, Councillor Darby, on the financial implications of this amendment, because I'm not clear at all. Is this asking us to spend more money, which we've got a motion on that has been passed about discretionary spending? So I just want to be clear.
Through the chair, I think what I heard Councillor Lee say is that he's asking how this matter effectively could be prioritised or put into the mix of the existing workload, I guess, for the next year or two, I think is what I heard. So that doesn't sound like additional money or resources. It's a prioritisation. The consequence of that, of course, is that other things, well, it either can be done or other things would need to drop off in order to fit it in, and you would still need to make that decision that is what you want to do, notwithstanding whether or not we believe you can even in law do a prohibited activity in this matter. The request is to how it can fit into the work program, I believe. Is that right, Councillor? Sorry, am I allowed to? Is that? I don't want to put
That's
words in your
absolutely
mouth.
correct,
Okay.
Ms Tyler.
Councillor Darby.
Chair, thanks, Councillor Lee. I'm generally okay as a second to include this, but I think it might need a little bit of tidy up, Chief of Strategy Assistance, around that third to last, second to last line. It just doesn't seem that clear, but maybe it's okay as long as we're clear here. But Megan, are you clear on those last? It's the penultimate line, third to last line.
Yeah, we're talking about the contingency budget and stuff, which is why I think I tried to explain it by how it could fit into the work program, which I think is what is. So that's how I'm reading that, and that's how I would come back. Is that okay?
There's one typo, I guess, or omission. Council adopted private plan changes because that's a big part of our activity as well, and therefore part of our budgetary expenditure in this planning business. So it should have, for future council and council adopted private plan changes. Thank you.
But generally we don't adopt private plan changes, we accept them.
We do.
I'll defer to you on this one as a former chair of the planning committee. Accept, thank you.
Well, look, I think I'm happy to go with the guidance of Chief of Strategy, just so that we, get it right.
We could just say, could we just say future public and private plan changes? The public ones are ours. Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah. Hey, there we go. Thanks.
Councillor Filipainen.
Chair, I just wanted to clarify, and then I didn't want to do a point of order, but just want to clarify that the amendment has been moved and seconded, which is good. And then I just wanted to sort of not ask a question, but just indicate that I'll be supporting the amendment. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Cool. Councillor Ferry, question or comment, I guess, now?
Thanks. Sorry, I'm still a little unclear about, and I think my issue is the use of the words contingency budget, and I'm just a little unclear because from what Megan said, I do feel like we are talking about prioritisation and stuff, but contingency budget is not a phrase I'm familiar with us using, so I'm just trying to eliminate contingency. Yeah. That would do it. Sorry. Just contingency is usually something we have on a project to allow for, and this is not that kind of process.
Sure. Yeah. The message I was trying to get across was to avoid the idea that here is a sudden, large, one-off, unbudgeted piece of expenditure. What the information I'm looking for, and this is just information, how such a plan change could be included in the normal forward budget for this particular division.
Thank you.
This is sort of not proper questioning either, but Councillor Lee, my only concern is that with option 4, are you locking if we support this, is your assumption that we're supporting prohibited, or we're just supporting a report on how it could happen? Yes. Excuse me, Councillor Walker, I'm asking Councillor Lee.
I'm not trying to slip this past anyone. This is asking for more information. We do have budgetary challenges. and we need, and yet on the other hand, and the budgetary challenges have been influential, I think, in a number of groups coming to the positions they have. My concern is that we need to seek a final resolution to this running sore, really, problem, and therefore what we're looking for now is just further information. Rather than saying we're going to shut down completely option 4, what we need is further information to be brought back to this committee at sometime in the future so that the committee can say, well, it's just not possible, it's just not feasible, just not doable, or it is, and we can move forward. That's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. And I'll just speak briefly on your amendment. I will, because I'm trying to be as kumbaya as possible here, support it. But I will just sort of mention that even the report for staff to do this alone is discretionary spending. So the work the staff will have to do to prepare reporting back to us is discretionary. So you will well know I did not support that discretionary spending motion because of things like this. It does not allow flexibility. So we keep having this request coming up for spending outside budget. So I will just say my concern is that this will keep coming up, and we've already got a motion on the book saying this stuff shouldn't happen. But I will support it because I know that there's a lot of concern, and it would be good to have the information on how this can proceed. So yes, so we'll go to, I think the Mayor said he'd like a division on this one, so we will move to that. Councillor Henderson, last comment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, I just wanted to say that I agree with your kōrero completely. I'm really on the fence here. I don't really know what to do, because on the one hand, I do want to be responsive to the concerns of the community and the residents involved. I think that was really influential in my thinking. But the flip side to that is that you're absolutely right. We can't have these unbudgeted expenditure items coming up over and over when we have a resolution that is valid and has been passed despite my objection on that. And, you know, I've got communities in my ward that are not getting pest traps. They're not getting the needs to take care that they need to take care of their environment that they've been doing on behalf of council for a long time. They're not getting that because of the discretionary spending resolution that was passed. So I think we do need to respect that resolution. So I'm really on the fence here. I don't know what to do, Chair.
Councillor Dalton.
I guess it's just another point of clarification. I thought the report wasn't going to be coming back until later. Like, the report is not in this financial year. The report is not coming back until 2026. I just want that to be clarified, because if it is, then that is something that can be budgeted for, and we don't have to be concerned about the discretionary spending this year. My second point was going to be around, we heard from the officers earlier that prohibited activity, it might be for you, Megan, prohibited activity is a really, really high bar. Are we sending ourselves off on a bit of a wild goose chase here? I mean, I appreciate getting the report back with all of that information, but is it money well spent when if we think we know the answer already?
Through the chair, there does seem to be two elements to this. Firstly, it's how could it fit into the work program? The second element is the advice that about whether we are able to legally, or we believe the case to make these matters prohibited is actually worth doing. And you've heard my advice to you before, which is we don't believe. So notwithstanding, Councillor, you're absolutely right, it is in the Act, you can make prohibited activities. Fact is, it's incredibly hard to do so, and my view is that I don't believe this would meet it. However, it does feel like we would also need to bring that advice to you as well, because then you would make a decision, notwithstanding whatever the advice is. Yes, you would still go for that option, for example, if that's what you want to vote for. So it does feel like there's two elements to it.
I just wanted to clarify the timing of the report back. Was it like 2026, not 2023? Because then we can budget for it. But I think Councillor Lee was saying sometime in the future. Just want to pin down the future.
I'll respond if I could, Mr. Chairman. One doesn't like to be directive or prescriptive. Obviously, this is work on this issue is whatever happens is ongoing. Given the resolutions which will be passed, which are essentially the officer recommendations, they will be passed, and that will mean that officers will be engaged in this matter for a wee while yet. And so, in that context, as part of those that work stream, one would assume that this particular request could be dealt with in that context. So the assumption is, in the reasonable future, after all, this report has taken a long, long time to achieve from late 2021, and so therefore I would be expecting that this report would come back in the next 2 or 3 months.
Can I make a suggestion, which may or may not be helpful? Is that okay, Chair?
To be honest, Councillor Ferry, that I think we might just move on the. I don't want it to be changed and then we debate the change. But okay, come forward. I've let everyone else have a go, so sorry about that, Councillor Ferry.
That's all right. You got there in the end. So I was going to suggest, I mean, the word report has been used there, and I wonder if there's a little bit of a halfway house here, which is we've heard that the local boards did get some advice on this matter. So maybe we're talking about, rather than a full report, which does cost time and money, we're talking about a memo that actually pulls together the advice that's already been gathered as a first step. And then that has, I think, reasonably low cost, hopefully, in terms of staff time, and would give us all a sense of whether the next step is feasible or not, which would cost more money. So that's my suggestion anyway. I don't know, Member Lee, if that meets with your approval, but I see the genuine concern here and the need to look at it, but I wonder if that's a way forward that limits the impact on discretionary spending.
I think if I can maybe go from the chair, it does say report back, not provide a report. So maybe that is up to staff to figure out how to do the most affordable reporting back. Councillor Williamson?
Yeah, I just want to make it clear, I am bewildered and perplexed and flummoxed about what the hell is going on in this whole lot. And I have no idea what the unintended consequences or the time frame or anything else, and I will certainly be voting against it.
Thank you, Councillor. And I only just received this from Councillor Lee, so I'm trying to listen to the local member and support the amendment, but that is absolutely your right to oppose. Yeah, I didn't write the amendment, so yeah. Thank you. So right, so we will put it to a vote. There's been a division called. Councillor Lee and Councillor Walker have moved this amendment.
Yeah.
I was going to incorporate it, but Councillor Walker said no. I've seconded it. Want it?
Oh God.
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't. I've not said that.
Point of order.
Not verbally, not by email, not by text.
No, I can. You didn't have your councillor. You didn't have councillor. You didn't have your mic on, but both Sandra and I heard you say when I said I'd incorporate it. Anyway, we have moved to division. No debate on that.
Can I just clarify then, are we taking a division on A to H? Just H? Thank you. Members, you're voting on clause H of the motion which is on your screen. Chair Hills.
In favour.
Member Ashby. Councillor Baker.
For.
Councillor Bartley.
For.
Mayor Brown. Deputy Chair Dalton.
Against.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Ferry.
For.
Councillor Filipina.
For.
Councillor Fletcher.
Abstain.
Councillor Henderson.
No.
Councillor Lee.
For.
Councillor Leone. 4. Councillor Newman.
Yes.
Councillor Sayers.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Simpson. Councillor Stewart.
No.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
Yep.
Councillor Williamson.
No.
Thank you. So that will be included in the substantive. That was carried 14 votes to 6. So now we move to the substantive item. Is there any debate? I think we've gone through. Oh, Councillor Darby.
Yeah, I do want to say some words on this, and I appreciate the amendment, Councillor Lee. I appreciate the work the staff have done. I do want to acknowledge Councillor Papacoombe, who has done a lot of work on this, also at the previous council, worked with the respective chairs of the 3 boards. But look, I sort of look at this, you know, I've taken an interest in helicopters and been part of submissions against particular helipad applications over the years. I've made the complaints about helicopter noise, low flying, etc. I've never made it to the council because, as Councillor Lee was outlined before, you know, you don't know where to complain on helicopters. But I found myself complaining to Mechanics Bay helipad. I found myself complaining to a commercial operator who were fantastic, Helitrans. Tony Monk responded really positively. And I've also complained to Civil Aviation Authority, but not to this council. And I think it is important that this council does clarify and create a vehicle for people to lodge those complaints. But you know, in proximity to the inner city suburbs of Auckland, there are 3 commercial helipad operations. 3 commercial helipad operations. And then if you move out a little bit more, there's 3 more. So in this, close to the city centre and the suburbs, lovely suburbs of Herne Bay, you've got Mechanics Bay, Rosedale, and then the Onehunga one. And then you've got Auckland Airport, North Shore Airport, what's the other one? Ardmore. So there's really no shortage of commercial helipads. And then you go to the islands, you've got Okiwi and Claris on Aotea, and then Carson's Field, at the dead centre of Waiheke, and a 20-minute ride to anywhere on Waiheke, absolute maximum, and there are hire vehicles there available, Councillor Lee. So there's no shortage of commercial heliport opportunities for people to use. I really struggle to find a reason why, in this day and age, let alone previously, to find that we actually are so permissive in regard to helipads in residential and sensitive areas and other sensitive areas. They are without doubt socially and environmentally intrusive to a degree many of you may not know. I live with helicopters over my home most days. The noise is one thing. The air displacement, especially when they come low to land, is another thing. And the disturbance to the residential amenity and the public amenity generally, particularly, you know, over beaches, say, you know, Herne Bay Beach, etc., and many others, is quite significant. Then you measure also the ecological impact, which is not adequately being picked up at the moment. I do not think so. So my message to the lovely folk of Herne Bay, if they want to take their champagne hampers and their polo sticks somewhere via helicopter, is use a commercial airfield like Mechanics Bay. And I just noticed using AT Journey Planner, you can take the outer link and the Tamaki link and you're there in a whiff. It's very convenient. And on the islands, you've got those airfields I mentioned, and you can hire a car. There's lots of opportunities to get you to your batch. So I do lean strongly towards the prohibited status, and I'm delighted we're going to be looking at, you know, guiding people on how to lodge complaints. The last part I just want to emphasise, Chair, is the discretion that our staff have to use or to ensure ecological reports are required for any future applications. It is vitally important. Now, I would just like our staff to make sure that they look at the Auckland Unitary Plan and the Islands Plan and look at every avenue to give themselves the room to be asking for ecological reports. I'm just quite stunned that they have not been as forthcoming in the past as I think they should have been. But look, I'm not the planning expert, but I think the community experts out there are wanting a change in that regard, and I think it needs to be made. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Filipaina.
Chair, just very briefly, if we go back to some of the reports that have been furbished in this committee and with Councillor Darby's committee, I want to acknowledge the staff through this whole process. If we go back and also want to acknowledge your leadership to Councillor Darby. If we go back to the 30th of November in 2021, we had the Herne Bay Residents Association come to public forum. We also had Elena Keith come through as well around these helicopters. So they've been around, obviously, as people have said, around this table for a very long time. But have a look at the at their submissions when they came through in November, and then the report based on the local boards at Waiheke and also Aotea, and that got reported on the 5th of May. Have a look at that report in regards to it. I supported Councillor Lee's, and it's now been incorporated into the substantive based on information that I heard from Megan, and the fact that our staff will have a look at a report coming through. If we have a look at the agenda items we've had, for us, it may take up to about 5, 6, 7, 8 months. But I think for us, in regards to this discretionary spending, I think for us around the issues that have been identified, it will be something from the 2 local boards and also the issues that have been raised by our community. So definitely support your recommendations, Chair. I want to acknowledge you as well again as the lead, Megan Gilder.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Doesn't matter. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, just briefly, if there's no one else who would like to... Councillor Say.
Thanks, Richard. Look, I support this. This suddenly gives the ability for any future resource consents to take in a number of other factors which haven't been able to be taken in the past, particularly around the protection of wildlife and endangered and rare wildlife, seabird life. Also, I think I'll leave it at that, Richard. That'd be my comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Last calls, anyone? Cool, thank you. And I'll just speak briefly. It is quite comprehensive. This is one of those motions that probably will slightly please everyone and slightly annoy everyone at the same time. So I know especially our local boards and Quiet Sky, Waiheke and others who wish that the common sense would prevail and we could do this overnight, because it does seem ridiculous, that the situation we're in, but we do know the complex systems in place and the costs and the budget constraints we're under. These were the number of resolutions, hearing from all sorts of people and parts of the council of what we potentially could do quickly and hopefully pull that forward. I know that through maybe Councillor Lee's addition, that maybe we'll be able to have a conversation around long-term plan, bringing something forward as well. But there is just not the scope in this next year to do this work, but there is the scope to pull up that option 2 part, the National Planning Standard, out of that omnibus. So that's a start, and then the work, as you can clearly see, that the council is pretty backing a change and moving forward and prioritising. So I'm sorry to the community and to the wildlife that this isn't fast or something that can be done, but I think all ears and eyes and compliance are going to have to be hotter on this, and we'll make sure that it's easier to complain. And I just want to say thank you to everyone around the table. It's been a long discussion, but I've tried my best to keep everyone happy on this. So we will move now. All those in favour? Any opposed? Cool, thank you very much. And we will move on now to an extension of time, and we might just have a bathroom break if everyone would like that. Councillor Walker will move an extension of time. I'll second it.
Sorry.
And we'll have a 5-minute break. Thank you.